Why are we not running it? You don't have the logical theological one? Well, so we're running. We're live. Well, hey everybody. And good evening to you as well. We're running live, so we're going to get started. Where did I put my phone? There it is. Let's get it pulled up so our Facebook people feel like they're included in the discussion, because you know how they get. They get very, very, hi Holly. All right, and hi Ron. Okay. How we doing? Good to see you all. Leviticus, that's the most excited you're ever going to hear a church member get for Leviticus, right there. You just heard it. If you were not with us last week, either in here or online, we did open with Exodus last week and completed it. And then we talked about how Leviticus as a whole is set up and some of the themes in it. So we talked about the distinctions between the ceremonial, moral, and judicial laws, and how I think that's actually a really terrible way of dividing up Leviticus. And the reason being is because when you read Leviticus, what you find out is that there is no such separation. And in fact, many of the laws that have to do with, let's say, ceremonial, for example, are also considered moral. And some of them that are moral are also highly judicial. So it's hard to separate and say that we only follow the moral aspect of Leviticus and not the ceremonial or judicial aspect of Leviticus, because that distinction becomes very, very complicated. There's not a lot of clear distinction between these laws. There's a lot of gray area that blurs them together. Now, that begs the question for many Christians, which is, does that mean then that we should still be living according to Leviticus? And what I mean by that is, should we still be living according to the so-called ceremonial distinctions, the cleanliness laws, the food laws, the sacrificial laws, the priestly laws, so on and so forth? And my answer to that is no. And we don't need to divide Leviticus up to arrive at that answer. Jesus himself tells us that he establishes all foods as being clean. That happens both in Acts chapter 10 and then Mark or Luke makes those side notes in the Gospels when describing some of the things that Jesus is doing there. Thus he proclaimed all, or declared all things clean. We don't need a priestly law because the New Testament tells us that we are all priests before God in this new covenant of the blood of Christ, that we all are a holy nation, a royal priesthood, as Peter says. We've been studying Peter over the last several months now in our Sunday morning Life Bible studies, and that's one of the things that we've talked about, is that we are collectively, as a body, also priests to God, and Jesus is therefore our high priest. What that means then is that our engagement with the world is priestly in nature, that we can go as an intermediary between the world and Christ to bring them to reconciliation through the sacrifices that our high priest Jesus offered, namely himself, okay? So this is the reason I bring this up is because Leviticus is one of those books that we are apt to do one of two things that are both incredibly wrong, in my opinion. The first one is on one extreme to say that we should follow all of this, that everything in here is still binding on Christians, and that is not, you can't really make a holistic theological argument for that. You're going to run into a lot of problems in the New Testament with regard to that approach. The more popular approach is, in my opinion, equally damaging, which is to say, just throw the whole thing out. We don't need it. We don't need to study it. We don't need to know what it says. It's done. It's done away with. The priesthood is gone. Israel as a nation, judicially, is gone. So there's no need for any of this. That is, in my mind, as problematic. There are many things in Leviticus that benefit us, that are enlightening, if you will, to the way that Christ operated when he was on earth in the flesh, and the way that we understand the holiness of God. So Leviticus is an important book for us to read, just not all that often, if you will. So let's look at some of these. We're not going to spend a ton of time. Up to this point, we've sort of established a pattern here in this class, which is to spend a lot of time in one book of the Bible. Genesis is what we did with that. I think we spent at least two, or at least a part of 2 sessions in Exodus. So your expectation so far is this is about the length of time we're going to take in each book of the Bible. That's about to change. We're not going to spend a ton of time in Leviticus. We're not going to spend a ton of time in Numbers or Deuteronomy. We're going to look at, again, things that you are likely very unfamiliar with, things that are interesting to me, things that I think are fascinating that don't get enough airtime, and then we'll move on, and we'll get to Joshua and Judges, and then the class. The one cool thing about this class is that the feel of this class changes dramatically over the course of our time, because the material changes dramatically over the course of our time. So as we begin with Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, if you weren't here for the first couple weeks, the Torah is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. It is known as the Pentateuch in the Greek Old Testament. But the Torah is very different from the law, or from the prophets and the writings. And so when we get into those sections, the way that we approach the Scripture, the way that we unpack the stories is going to be a little bit different as well. Leviticus 1, verse 1 through 738. We're not going to read all of this, obviously. You're like, praise the Lord. We're not going to go verse by verse through that. What this is this is a distinction of the different types of offerings that are to be done regarding, different kinds of transgressions, or for different purposes is probably the better way of saying it. When you get to Leviticus chapter 1, the very subtitle above all that should say something like the law of burnt offerings. Anyone have that? Yeah, the law of burnt offerings. So chapter 1 is going to describe a particular type of offering that the Israelites were to offer for a specific reason. Now, with that being said, this is an important note to make, that when we talk about sacrifices, the sacrificial system in the Old Testament, if we're not careful, and if you're not too aware of what's going on in the Old Testament, then what you might think is that the sacrificial system was one kind of sacrifice, right? Like a blood offering. You somehow drain the blood of an animal, and that's your offering. The animal dies, that's the sacrifice, and the blood is the offering. That's one kind of offering. But there are many kinds of offerings that the people of God would have been giving over and over and over again for various different purposes. So the burnt offering is one where the carcass of the animal is burned, and the smell of the burning flesh, the imagery, all of that is a picture before God as the smoke rises. You get some, there's a psalm that talks about the smoke filling the nostrils of God. Of course, anthropomorphism there. But this is one type of offering that you would expect to find in the Old Testament. You go into chapter 2, what does your subtitle say there? Grain, right, grain offering. So this one doesn't even include animals. This is just a grain offering. This is something that, again, the people of God would be doing on a regular basis. Chapter 3, you have peace offerings. Chapter 4, you have sin offerings. Now, this is one where I want us to just pause for a moment and talk for a little bit about this one. The sin offering is one that is obviously very important. This is to cover sin, specific sin that is known, that is intentional, that is not. There's another offering that we'll get to later that is for sin that is not known. So just in case you've sinned, like you've been keeping record, you think you're doing pretty good, but there's probably something in there that you didn't do well and you just didn't really notice it. So you offer a sacrifice for that as well, just to make sure you're double covered. This one is specifically for sin offerings. And there's a whole lot of blood that is involved in this, and the innards of an animal and all kinds of stuff. But what I want to draw your attention to is down, let's see here, verse 32. It says, "But if he brings a lamb as his offering for a sin offering, he shall bring it, a female without defect. He shall lay his hand on the head of the sin offering and slay it for a sin offering in the place where they slay the burnt offering. So this is the same place where they're doing burnt offerings. This is where sin offerings are done as well. The priest is to take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger and put it on the horns of the altar of the burnt offering, and all the rest of its blood he shall pour out at the base of the altar. Now, when reading this with blossoming Old Testament eyes and a not huge working knowledge of the New Testament, this seems like a just rather descript way of offering a sacrifice, but nothing else seems all that odd about this. There's nothing specific about it that stands out. But what we find out is that this is the only place where blood is specifically poured out for sin, a sin offering. You have it here, and you have it in the establishment of the covenant that God makes with Moses, where basins of blood are poured out as well. Leviticus 4 and in Exodus. Those are the only two places you see that. Now, that imagery, and particularly the wording there, is very important. Poured out. Blood that is poured out. Now, I want you to go to Matthew 26. I will say, those of you who took my Old Testament class the first time around, you did not get this much New Testament. So this second version of it, y'all are getting a lot more. In Matthew 26, Jesus institutes the Passover meal that he repurposes that we call today the Lord's Supper. Now, we talked about the Passover when we were in Exodus, and how the Passover meal is a generational, yearly practice of Jewish people for hundreds and hundreds of years up to the point of Jesus. And when Jesus practices it and retools it, if you will, to orient it towards memorializing himself and not what God did in Egypt, this is a major shift in Jewish teaching and in Christian thought. This is where it distinctly becomes a Christian practice and not a Jewish practice. It's kind of a merging of the two. But the verbiage in this is very intentional from the Lord. Verse 27 of Matthew 26, it says, "When he had taken a cup and given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, 'Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins.'" So here we have blood being poured out, right? Blood of the covenant, no doubt. Exodus 24:8, that's where that other passage where the basin of the covenant blood is poured out for establishing the Mosaic covenant and the people of God. Here we have Jesus' blood being pictured in the Welch's grape juice that is supposed to picture his blood being poured out for sin. And notice that Jesus, the Jewish rabbi, is using the same terminology that would have been used in a sin offering from the Old Testament in Leviticus 4. So this is intentional. And the people, this is what is so cool and why studying again the Old Testament is so awesome, is that the disciples knew that. They had gone to the temple to sacrifice many times in their lives. They had heard and read and memorized these stories. They were very familiar with Leviticus chapter 4 and what the sin offering entailed and what it looked like. And when the lamb is slaughtered and the blood is put on the horns of the altar and the rest is poured out, and Jesus says, "Here is my blood being poured out for the forgiveness of your sins," he's saying, no longer are lamb's blood going to suffice. Or it's no longer going to be needed, because my blood will be poured out for the forgiveness of sin. Once and for all, Hebrews tells us. So studying this stuff, again, this is just a great reminder for how the Old Testament unlocks major portions of the New Testament and gives us a deeper, I think, fuller understanding of the words of the Lord himself. Any questions on that one? Mm-hmm. When did they stop giving sacrifices? It's a good question. So they continued after the Messiah is crucified. We know from history that those first probably 30 to 40 years were a huge jump in numbers of Christians, people that identified as Christians. This is when primarily Paul is planting churches, but all of that is happening in Acts. If you remember, it says that they would start first in the tabernacles, and then they would go and proclaim outward. So tabernacles, Jewish faith. Are we back up? There we go. Sorry online, guys. Batteries died. I didn't say anything of value while it was down. So all that to say, it is still a blossoming faith. Christianity is. Judaism is still working very heavily as well. They're still sacrificing in the temple throughout all of that church development. It's around 70 AD when the temple is sacked and destroyed that there's no place to sacrifice after that. Now this brings up a whole nother discussion and a really interesting question that you're asking here about how Judaism survives that. And when you study modern day Judaism, how they reckon with this is very fascinating. And we don't have time to cover it tonight. And I'm honestly not well versed enough in modern Judaism to even really be able to talk at a level that I think I should be able to talk at in a format like this. But there's a lot of explaining away these passages in order to continue to be a practicing Jew without a temple. Because temple life was just that, temple life. And without it, death. So, does that answer it? Cool. Yeah. Yeah.
So you had mentioned the word choice in terms of Jesus' blood being poured out, or rather the blood from the sin offering being poured out.
Right.
Jesus making reference to that, and you had said it was important because the disciples would have understood that. This might be kind of a silly question, but it is one that popped into my head.
Yeah.
I feel like for the entirety of the Gospels, we only ever see stuff that like goes over the disciples' heads instead of that just.
Yeah.
That's like where my thought ends.
Yeah.
I guess my question is,
Are we sure they got it?
are we sure they got it?
Yeah. No, that's a fantastic question. Yes. So Josh online, for those of you watching, is asking, how do we know that the disciples would have picked up on this? Because it seems like everything goes over their heads. And that is a great point, and it is certainly possible. In fact, I can almost imagine that like maybe one or two of them got it, and the rest are like, not really thinking anything of it. And there's like an awkward conversation later where he's like, yeah, we said pour it out. And they're like, so what? And you're like, Leviticus 4, right? Of course, they wouldn't have said Leviticus 4 because they didn't have chapters, but well, and even when Jesus prays, I mean, the way we translate it in English is very forgiving. But when he thanks the Lord for the disciples, he's basically saying like, thank you, Lord, for these idiots you've given me. Like they just don't get anything, right? But he's still praying for them and praying on their behalf. And so, I think the thing that they miss often are the nuanced messianic allusions that Jesus puts forth. Now, this is kind of one of them, because he's saying my blood is going to be poured out. And so I don't know that to be fair, I don't know that they understood. In fact, I would be certain they didn't understand that his blood was going to be poured out in such a way that it would redeem the world. Okay? And by that, you know what I mean. Not like literally, but figuratively. But the illusion of blood being poured out for forgiveness of sin, I think it probably would have hit most of them. I'm not sure they would have known what he meant, but they definitely would have put something together like, this is sacrificial language, you know. And not just the disciples, but anyone really from that time. And really any of the early Christians who were hearing, because it wasn't written yet, but hearing these verbal accounts. What's fascinating is, and this is where, you know, putting together the Gospels, that's a whole nother, maybe we'll do that sometime as well, class where you kind of put together, because Luke gives some details that Matthew doesn't give and Mark does, and then of course we wouldn't include that, John's on his own. But the three synoptic Gospels kind of give different elements of the story. And when Luke talks about his version or his account of the Lord's Supper, he includes a word actually in it that is also incredibly important. He talks about the memorial language from Exodus 12, but then, let's see here, it says, verse 20, this is Luke 22 if you're taking notes, and in the same way, he took the cup after they had eaten, saying, "This cup which is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood." So you get the blood of the covenant in Matthew, which is an allusion to Exodus 24. In Luke 22, you get the new covenant, which is establishing the old is gone and the new is arriving here and being ratified in my sacrifice. So that's the importance, again, of reading the gospel stories collectively. You miss some of these really important details that, for one reason or another, Matthew was cueing in on one thing, Luke was cueing in on another. It makes sense. Matthew's audience, we think, was primarily Jewish. Luke's audience, we believe, was primarily Gentile. And so establishing the new covenant there in that language for a Gentile would have been more important than perhaps a Jew, who would have probably connected better to the Exodus 24 language. Yeah, good question. Mary, did you have a question as well?
Yeah, it's a little on a whole different
Mm-hmm.
sorry. About the fact of the altar.
Yeah.
I think I've heard often that is very significant. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, it's significant in that it is the directions for putting the altar together are very specific. I don't know that I would say that there's any sort of like imagery that.
I'm curious about the blood being placed on the altar.
Right, so it's because it's the actual altar where God specifies the sacrifice should be done, and blood is seen as a cleansing agent. It's funny because we don't think of it that way. We think of it as like the very opposite of cleansing. The thing you cannot clean out of fabric. But it is used in a sin setting to cleanse blood. And so it's put on there for that purpose. Yeah, very good question. It's also kind of something interesting about God choosing horns on the altar. I think it, if anything, just supports guys who want trophies on their wall, you know? If God's for it, who are we to judge? Am I right? This is coming from someone who doesn't have any trophies on his wall, okay? I'm not like a big hunter. I'm just saying I think there's a good case to be made. Any other questions before we continue on? I'm going to make one other point on this first point here, and then we will move on. So you have the guilt offering, and this has to do with deception, with lying, with there's a variety of qualifications in here. Now, we get to chapter 6, verse 7, and there's a break. Again, you should have a break in your Bible. I don't know if there's a heading or not, but it should say something like the priest part in the offerings or something like that, the priestly role, something to that nature. So again, I think this is just an interesting part. If you read the first 6 chapters of what the people of God are responsible for, then you get to 6 verse 8 through 7, I have it notated here, 7:38. This is the priest role in all of this. So again, just very detailed instruction on what is to happen, how it's to happen, how it's to take place. God had a very specific way that he intended these things to take place. And so if you ever, again, are just up at night, wired up, gosh, can't sleep, Leviticus, right, 1 through 738 is my recommendation, and you'll be out in no time. I have no doubt. I have no doubt. Leviticus 8 and 9. We'll talk through this quickly. This is, again, we're not going to look at any one particular verse, but I'm just going to kind of give you some overarching things that I think are important. So this is the establishment of the priesthood. So this is where Aaron is dictated high priest, and the overwhelming picture that we get of how the priesthood comes together comes from these two chapters. And again, a lot of very specific imagery in this that is, more than anything, dictates how specific God was about how he wanted the priesthood to look, how he wanted them to operate, what he expected from them, if you will. I do want to point out one thing in verse 8 of chapter 8. It says, he then placed the breastpiece on him, and in the breastpiece he put the Urim and Thummim. Now this is one of those verses that if you were again, just completely had no experience with Jewish history, then you would be confused by this. What is the Urim and the Thummim? So these are, how do I say this without sounding controversial? These are the divining tools to know what God desires from his people. Have you ever seen the movie Stardust? Jessica's very happy that I'm mentioning this. It's a fantastic movie. If you've never seen it, there's nothing inappropriate in it. It is a magical story. It is really wonderful. It has, I am thinking of no one right now, Robert De Niro. Who are the people? It doesn't matter. The blind. Yes. Yeah, the guy who played Daredevil in Netflix, Sienna Miller. Anyways, it doesn't matter. So there's a scene, and if you've ever watched anything that has any kind of like ancient witchcraft in it, okay, which I don't know why you would, but you'll see sometimes someone that have these two little like pebble-looking things, rock-looking things, and they'll shake them and throw them in the air, and when they fall, they look at how they're positioned, and that somehow tells them something from the spirit world. Anyone familiar with this practice? Seen it in popular television? Yeah, like rune. Yeah, yes. So the Urim and Thummim are very similar to that. Prophets of the Old Testament didn't always receive prophetic revelation through just like a dream or a vision. There were times when people understood direction from God in more, what's the word I'm looking for? There's a word for that, where you have like an umbrella inside or don't go under a ladder. Superstitious. It would almost seem more superstitious in nature. So can you think of any New Testament practices that are similar to this? There's one in particular that's, what is it? Casting lots. So if you remember in Acts, in the book of Acts, Judas has died. They need a replacement. You would think that like, God gave me a revelation. And they're like, nah, just draw straws. The Spirit can work through the straws. I'm confident. I mean, this seems like very superstitious. This is a huge deal. A guy became an apostle from drawing straws. I mean, that's just incredible to me, right? So the Urim and Thummim, these are practices that to our modern eyes would seem incredibly superstitious, and yet they were acceptable. I think that's an important detail to bring up, and here is why. Because the Old Testament expressly condemns witchcraft. I've said this before in other classes, I'm sure. I know I have. I don't remember which ones, but I'll say it again because it's worth repeating. That we get the idea, I think, that witchcraft is a sort of like taboo thing that Christians should avoid because it's worldly and it's like imaginary nonsense that leads us away from the Lord. Something like that. Witchcraft is condemned in the Old Testament because it's real. Not because it's just a silly thing that we should avoid and not be wrapped up in. It's a real thing. It's a very dangerous thing. It results in very catastrophic moments in the Old Testament. And so we should not participate in witchcraft type affairs, not because it's not the Christian thing to do, but because it's literally real and dangerous and tapping into a place that we are not meant to tap into. So we avoid it. With that being said, let me also just say that that is not the same thing as watching a Harry Potter movie. Okay? Now, maybe you are uncomfortable with watching movies like that, Harry Potter. That is your business. The New Testament, I believe, would say to you, you need to live according to your conscience on that. But we have to not go down that route either, because what that does is it cheapens our understanding of what actual witchcraft really is. It's not Hogwarts, okay? It is an altogether different thing. And so I would say, Harry Potter, use your conscience. Same thing with Lord of the Rings, or anything Disney for that matter. And then over here, we don't use our conscience. We just say, this is expressly condemned and we're not going to do it. All right? Any questions on that one? Yeah? Do I believe it exists today? Yeah, I mean, I don't think it has disappeared at all. I don't have any reason to think it would. I think the New Testament would enlighten us a little bit about what is driving witchcraft, which is Satan and demonic powers. The Old Testament people of God, I'm not sure would have understood that, because Satan to them was not Satan to us. We understand Satan very differently than the people of God did. I made the point, I think in the first class, or maybe I haven't yet, I'm not sure, where Satan in the Old Testament, it was a sermon we did recently. It was the Satanology one, that when James and I did All Systems Go. Satan in the Old Testament is only found like 3 times expressly, where it is Satan. We have him in Zechariah chapter 3, where he appears to Joshua the high priest. We have him in Numbers, actually, where there is a census that is done. And then we have him that's in Chronicles. We have him in Numbers as well. You're probably thinking, well, what about Genesis chapter 3? Again, we as Christians would say that is Satan because of what Revelation and several other books indicate. To the Old Testament person, they would not have associated the serpent with Satan. And I did make that point the first class we did with Genesis. This introduces the very complicated relationship that Israel has with serpents, with snakes. Another one we're going to talk about actually tonight. So yeah, I would say that it absolutely exists today. That it is developed through satanic power. And I would say that Satan works in ways outside of witchcraft. In other words, I would say that not everything that is satanic is witchcraft, but everything that is witchcraft is satanic. Does that make sense? Yeah. I think Satan is way more clever than witchcraft today. I don't think it's not like the number one threat against the people of God today. He's a lot more sly than that. Any other questions on that one? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no. Yeah, it was specifically for, not just for your average. Bandai wasn't putting it out like they are the Ouija boards today, right? You're not going to Walmart to pick up I can't find my Urim and Thummim. Yeah. Good question. Anything else? All good questions. Do I have anything online? I'm covering them up. No? All right. Let's do the Day of Atonement. Leviticus 16. Ooh, this is a good one. This is a good one just because it's just weird, man. It's just there's some weird things in it. The Day of Atonement, or the Law of Atonement, depending on which translation you're reading. Now, I am going to read some of this, and we're going to talk through it. First of all, as an experiment, who has an ESV in here? Yeah, Mary? Okay, a couple of you. Great. NASB? Any NASBs? Say again? Oh, no, it's not. I'm just curious. Any NIVers in here? Good, all right. CSB? Any CSB? No CSB, wow. NKJV, yeah. NKJV is solid, man, I'm all for it. Any KJVers? It's okay, don't be shy. Good, all right, excellent. Update thyself. I'm just kidding. It's good. It's good. So there's one word in Leviticus 16 that I think is actually really puzzling, and not just me, but Hebrew scholars. This is a major interpretive issue in Old Testament theology. Start in verse 1. Now the Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron. By the way, we didn't cover that. That's Nadab and Abihu. Do you remember that story? They tried to offer strange fire on the altar, and God was significantly less forgiving then than he was with Jesus, and so he instantly struck them with fire, and they died. Again, illustrating the severity and the incredible reverence that the people of God are to have with regard to temple things, temple worship. God does not desire strange fire. He desires that which he has specified, and not anything else. After that, that's in chapter 10. So 8 and 9, you have the establishment of the priesthood. Chapter 10 is the two sons of Aaron dying as a result of this. 11 through 15 are sort of a side piece thing that is just more information about sickness and cleanliness and so on and so forth. Chapter 16 follows directly after chapter 10. We know that because of how verse 1 starts. Now the Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron, when they approached the presence of the Lord and died. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell your brother Aaron that he shall not enter at any time into the holy place inside the veil before the mercy seat which is on the ark, or he will die, for I will appear in the cloud over the mercy seat. Aaron shall enter the holy place with a bull for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He shall put on the holy linen tunic, and the linen undergarments shall be next to his body. And he shall be girded with the linen sash and attired with a linen turban. These are the holy garments. Then he shall bathe his body in water and put them on." This is to go into the presence of God. You need special clothes. You better have taken a shower. "He shall take them from the congregation of the sons of Israel, 2 male goats for a sin offering and 1 ram for a burnt offering. And then Aaron shall offer the bull for the sin offering, which is for himself, that he may make atonement for himself and for his household." Before he can offer for a sin offering, he's got to make it for himself because he's not clean either. This is one of the advantages that Jesus, the high priest, has that Hebrews talks about. He didn't have to make sacrifice for himself. He's perfect. He's without sin. "He shall take the 2 goats and present them before the Lord at the doorway of the tent meeting. Aaron shall cast lots for the 2 goats, 1 lot for the Lord and the other for the scapegoat. Then Aaron shall offer the goat on which the lot for the Lord fell and make it a sin offering. But the goat on which the lot for the scapegoat fell shall be presented alive before the Lord to make atonement upon it, to send it into the wilderness as the scapegoat. Then Aaron shall offer the bull of the sin offering, which is for himself, and make atonement for himself and for his household, and he shall slaughter the bull of the sin offering, which is for himself." Okay, we won't go on from there. Now, those of you who are reading the ESV are probably going, "Mine says something a little different." This is such an interesting interpretive problem in the Old Testament. The way that the New American Standard translates this indicates that Aaron, the high priest, is to shower, put on special clothing, a special hat, go into the holy place after sacrificing the bull for the sin of himself and his family. He takes these 2 goats to the front of the entryway of this tent, 1 for Yahweh. He casts lots, 1 for Yahweh and 1 for the scapegoat. Okay? And what it sounds like is happening is the one for Yahweh is slaughtered, and that is the sacrifice to God, and that the scapegoat then is imbued with, symbolically, the sin of the people, and then sent away into the wilderness, signifying the sin of the people is being removed from them and cast out away from them. Okay? It's the scapegoat. Now, let's read it from the ESV. The ESV, I believe, is, just for what it's worth, the better translation for the Old Testament. I'm just going to put it out there. I think they make better choices. I'm not an Old Testament expert, so don't take that too highly. Aaron, let's start in verse 6. Aaron shall offer the bull as a sin offering for himself, and shall make atonement for himself and for his house. Then he shall take the 2 goats and set them before the Lord at the entrance of the tent meeting. And Aaron shall cast lots over the 2 goats, one for the Lord and the other lot for Azazel. What? And Aaron shall present the goat on which the lot fell for the Lord and use it as a sin offering. But the goat on which the lot fell for Azazel, he shall be presented alive before the Lord to make atonement over it, that it may be sent away into the wilderness to Azazel. Now, just as a side note, before we go into this, have any of you ever seen, it's movie night tonight apparently. Have any of you ever seen the movie Fallen with Denzel Washington and John Goodman? It's about a particular demon that can go in between people, in between hosts through touch. And his name is Azazel. Azazel. There's a really popular Rolling Stones song that the demon's always singing. Time is on my side. It's a great movie. I can't only like I said that you should watch it. It's been a long time since I've seen it, and I don't remember what's in it, so I'm not going to endorse it. But that is borrowed from Old Testament lore of a demonic figure named Azazel. In fact, if probably more current reference, what was it? X-Men First Class. Any of y'all see that with Kevin Bacon?
Yes.
Man, no one. And I promise I read more than I watch movies. Just shows you how much I read. So there's a figure in Marvel as well named Azazel, and he's a very demon-looking guy. He's got a tail and everything. Okay, so here is what Jewish mythology later records, and what some Old Testament scholars think might be going on. That in Jewish mythology, there is a demonic figure named Azazel that lives in a desert area, a dry desert area, which actually, interestingly enough, the Gospels make reference to this, that demons seem to prefer this, right? And in Jewish history, Jewish lore, dry desert areas, especially at night, definitely not a place you want to hang around. They're super, super freaky for one reason or another. What some Old Testament scholars think might be going on here is that the same transaction is taking place. The 2 goats are brought to the tent. One cast lot for the Lord. He's sacrificed. That's the sin offering for the Day of Atonement. The other is used to put the sin upon this goat and then is sent to where sin belongs, which is with this other evil figure, signifying that it's back in its rightful destination, away from the people of God and back with this Azazel figure. That the sin is driven to a demonic or satanic force of some kind. What's interesting is that the actual Hebrew word here is Azazel. That's how you would say it. It's the Hebrew is just transliterated in ESV. New American Standard translates it scapegoat, but they're using that entirely based upon an interpretation of what is going on there. There is no textual evidence at all anywhere else in Hebrew that suggests Azazel should be translated as scapegoat. It's a interpretive move, which is why I don't like it that much, because I prefer translations to have as little interpretation involved as possible in its putting together. If you don't have a direct word or a textual reason to translate a word a certain way, then you shouldn't do it. And you should just keep the word, transliterate it. That's fine. I'm far better with that. Because what it does is then it gives us an opportunity to look throughout history after that point to find out if there's any significance. In this case, there is. Jewish mythology, like I said, does reference this particular figure. Whether or not that's how they understood it in the Old Testament, we don't know. We're not really sure. I would not say to you that I think the right interpretation is the second one, because I have no way of knowing. What I do know is that it seems like whatever this Azazel word, figure, place is, that it is just that it's not the goat, that it's something else, because it says that the goat is being sent into the wilderness to Azazel, not that the goat is Azazel. Does that make sense? So I am a bigger fan of the ESV's rendering of this for that reason, because I think it paints a slightly different but more accurate picture. Yeah. Yeah. Because he's the one speaking here. Yes. No. And so understand what I'm saying is we don't know. So here's how lore is developed. Lore is developed out of some understanding of truth or reality. Santa Claus, right? Great example. Santa Claus just didn't come out of nowhere. He's based on a historical figure, St. Nicholas. He becomes red and white Coca-Cola. That's actually not a lie. He really does. He's not red and white until a Coca-Cola ad in the early 1900s. So lore is developed through just a sequence of real events, but are sort of blown up and fantasized a little bit. So what I mean by that is Jewish mythology is not to be trusted as like just read it and accept it. There's some weird stuff in ancient Jewish mythology. But what I'm saying is they developed this figure from somewhere. They didn't just make it up, because it is in the Old Testament, that word is. I'm saying I don't know at this point when Moses is writing this that they understood Azazel to be, we don't know what they understood. I'm just saying that when we look at other history, we get a picture, albeit a fantastical picture, of what it could be. Yeah. Now, can I just submit to you for a moment that this is not something you're going to hear in most Bible studies, in most Sunday schools. This is just too weird, isn't it? Goats and some weird desert figure named Azazel where we're sending it after this just feels like more like a horror movie than it does the Bible. And the reason I bring these things up is because I want you to understand the Bible is actually really cool. Like, it's really weird and it's awesome. And it's not just this like dry, Americanized, like put together Baptist. And I'm not, I go to a Baptist seminary, right? We're a Baptist church, but we've got to think outside Baptist. We have to think biblically. And in order to think biblically, we have to think historically. And historically, we find things that just make us a little uncomfortable. So we got to get comfortable with it, because it's what's in the Scripture. Any questions on that? Yeah. The Gerasene demoniac? Yeah. Yeah. The man of the tombs? Bob Bennett, anyone? No? Okay, good. Well, pop culture, we're just going to do away with in this class. I'm just kidding. Bob Bennett is very, very far from pop culture. Okay, so yes, but you are right. Gerasene demoniac, very, very, and it's in that passage, and I can't remember the exact wording, but it talks about something about like dry areas or rocky, dry areas. I don't remember which account it's from. I think it's Mark's account, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be wrong about that. That is interestingly one of my favorite passages in all the Gospels. It is so incredible for many reasons that I don't have time to talk about tonight, but love that. Any other questions, thoughts on that before we move on? We got one more, and it's a quick one. So Leviticus 17 through 27 is going to wrap up with, again, more moral living. So you get unlawful sexual relations in 18, the holiness of the Lord, loving your neighbor as yourself in 19, punishment for child sacrifice, chapter 20, punishment for sexual immorality, holiness practices, feasts. So this is a big one. when you get to chapter 23, you get the feasts of the Lord, different feasts that Jewish people would practice. Of course, the Sabbath was every week on the first day of the week. You get the Passover once a year. You get the Feast of the First Fruits, which was something that also Christ fulfills. We did a study in, when was that? It was was it Genesis or was it Matthew? I feel like it would have had to have been Matthew, but then I also feel like it was later than that. I don't remember. I wrote the study, I don't remember. But there's one of them in there where I talked about the different feasts that Jesus fulfills and how he fulfills them. So obviously the Passover is one that we understand. Sin passes over us. He's the lamb slain. The Feast of First Fruits is imaged in Christ's life. The Feast of Trumpets, the Feast of Weeks, all of these things play a role in how the gospel is divided out. The Day of Atonement. So the Day of Atonement would again be something that is perfected in the person of Christ as well. The Feast of Booths was one that is in John, if you remember, where he stands up and says, if you drink, what is it, living water, I will give you living water and you will no longer thirst. I don't remember what chapter, John 8 or 9. That happens in the middle of the Feast of Booths. That's something that takes place there. Interestingly enough, you get in John's Gospel another feast that Jesus is celebrating that is not prescribed in Leviticus. It comes much later. Anyone want to take a guess at which feast that might have been? Let me go there and see if I can point out. This is not in my notes at all, so yeah, it is in Matthew? Yeah, okay. Let's see here. Where is it in John? I'll find it. Hold on. It's worth it. Maybe I won't find it. Healing of the pool. Okay, well, you know what? I'll come back next week, and I will remember, and I will tell you, and it will be awesome. It's Hanukkah. Hanukkah. So there's another name for it in the Gospels, and it is escaping me right now. I cannot remember, but Jesus is there practicing it. Now, Hanukkah comes together in the so-called, this is another big theological term, are you ready? The deuterocanonical era. Yeah, or the, I promise I'm not, or the intertestamental, that's another way of referring to it, the in-between testaments. So in between Malachi and Matthew, there is this portion of about 400 years or so, the so-called 400 years of silence. And during that time, some really important Jewish events take place. Yes?
I think you're talking about the Feast of the Dedication.
That's it. Yes. Yeah, John 10. Okay, I was going to say John 10, but I don't know why. When you got Google. Who needs Google? Who needs Google when you got Brittany, right? Am I right? Yeah, so John chapter 10. He goes, read it. It's really, really excellent. Starting in verse 22, at the time of the Feast of Dedication that took place in Jerusalem. That is a reference to Hanukkah. This takes place in that intertestamental period. Judas Maccabeus and that whole Maccabean revolution, if you will, which incidentally the Catholic Bibles include, 1st and 2nd Maccabees. And I don't, for what it's worth, I think Maccabees are really helpful to read. I just don't think they should be in the Bible. But they are really helpful to read. The reason I don't think they should be in the Bible is because the Jewish people never included it in their Bible. And if it wasn't good enough for the Jews, it's not good enough for us. But yeah, that is where that feast takes place. All that to say, these feast practices, this is where they come from, in Leviticus. And they hold a lot more value then than they do now, living on this side of the cross and the resurrection. But they do say a lot about what God thinks and how he feels with regard to, for example, sexual immorality. So there's a lot of New Testament passages that deal with sexual immorality, but we learn a lot more about what God thinks regarding sexual immorality and how he defines sexual immorality in the Old Testament. That would be a helpful thing for us to know today. And it would be something that New Testament Christians in the beginning would have known because they would have been reading this stuff because most of them were Jews. Questions on Leviticus as a whole? All right, Numbers it is. Ooh, let's see here. Where did the word scapegoat come from? And Michael Ramon knows Fallen. I knew I could count on you, man. Satan mentioned in Job. You're right. That's the third place. Very, very good. Margie asked, where did the word scapegoat come from? Margie, again, I think it's just probably they are using that word because it's what seems like what's happening. Even if, for example, we accept that Azazel is either a place or a person or figure, and this goat is having sin put on it and sent into the wilderness to that figure or that place, it still pictures what we would understand as a scapegoat. So the translators there are using that terminology. The trouble that I find is that if it is the scapegoat, then it can't go to the scapegoat. And it seems more like a location or place outside of the goat than the goat itself, if that makes any sense. Let's talk about numbers. In the Hebrew, in the Torah, if you will, it's just referred to not as numbers, but in the wilderness. In the wilderness. It's the wilderness story. The people of God are on this long, painful journey of rebellion and therefore traveling the extra long way, the extra scenic view to the ultimate promised land. The overview, you have the wilderness journey first in Sinai, that's in 119. You get to the wilderness of Paran in chapter 10, verse 12, and then to the plains of Moab in 22:1, and then again in 36:13. Wilderness generation is the first generation that comes out of Egypt, and all of them die, and a second generation are born before they finally get there. It's a long, painful 40-year journey. Really, really sucks. But again, a great picture of how God feels about sin and what we can expect when we understand that God is disciplining us. What does that look like? Sometimes we would say he's punishing me or he's condemning me. He's not. He's disciplining us. And disciplining isn't always just a slap on the hand. Sometimes it's 40 years in the wilderness. So that's, it sucks, but it is what it is. And it's better to be disciplined because it means that God loves us and we are indeed truly his children. Let's see here. We'll just jump right in. That's kind of the summary of it. Number 6, I'm not even going to start in the beginning. The reason why we call it Numbers, by the way, is there's a lot of numbers in it. Lots and lots and lots of lists of people, lots of numbers of tribes, and so on and so forth. Chapter 6 deals with, though, something very pertinent to us, and that is the Nazaritic vow or the Nazarite vow. Who's the most popular person who took the Nazarite vow? Samson. Yeah, Samson. Samson takes the Nazarite vow. Anyone else know? Another one? John the Baptist. Oh, y'all are great. Y'all don't even need me. You've got the Old Testament figured out. John the Baptist is one who takes the Nazarite vow. Samson being probably the most popular just because his story really has to do with the vow that is taken and his ultimate fall as a result of it. The Nazarite vow specifies a few things. Let's read together. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when either a man or a woman makes a special vow, the vow of a Nazarite, to separate himself to Yahweh, he shall separate himself from wine and strong drink. He shall drink no vinegar made from wine or strong drink, and shall not drink any juice of grapes or eat grapes, fresh or dried. All the days of his separation, he shall eat nothing that is produced by the grapevine, not even the seeds or the skins." So it's not like don't drink beer, don't drink wine. It's like anything that is even used to make alcohol, you're going to stay away from. All right. All the days of the vow of separation, no razor shall touch his head. Until the time is completed for which he separates himself to the Lord, he shall be holy. He shall let the locks of hair of his head grow long. Now this is an important just side note. How long is the Nazarite vow to be taken? No. That's good. all the days of his vow. So it's not specified, which means that someone could take the Nazirite vow for, say, a specific set of time and then no longer be under that vow. Complete the vow and move on. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I guess you were maybe about to perhaps read that, but does it say what the vow is for? It just sounds like from that description, it's like, all right, stay away from alcohol and all sorts of related chronics, plants, paraphernalia, whatever.
So the point of it is to set himself apart and to the Lord. So it says in verse 5, until the time is completed for which he separates himself to the Lord, he shall be holy. So in that time frame, the point of the vow is holiness, ultimate holiness. It's like an ultra set apartness.
Only do it for a period of time then.
Well,
Who decides, all right, I'm done being holy now?
yeah. Well, and so that's a great great question. That's a great question. So it's not that by coming out of the Nazaritic vow, you're no longer holy. It's that this is a special set apartness for a specific purpose. So Samson, if you remember, is set apart because his mother cannot have children. And the deal that she makes is, if you will give me a child, I will give him to you for service, for life. So Samson's a little different because he didn't make the vow. He was made it for him. He was vowed. So it just depends on. I would kind of think of it as like fasting. When we fast, we're fasting for a specific purpose, to intensify prayer and connection to the Lord through His Spirit, to have a singular focus, to decrease distraction, to intensely go before the Lord for some special interest. I mean, the same case could be made. Like, why do we ever stop fasting? Apart from obviously dying. I mean, there are things you could fast from, though, forever. So why do we only do it for a specific time frame? And does it make you bad once you stop fasting? And I would say no. It's an intensified version. Yeah.
So based on that scripture that you read, it sounds like the Nazirite vow is just sort of open to anyone that would like to do it. It
Yeah.
doesn't sound like there's any prerequisite.
Nope.
And yet there are only two key people that we've talked about in the Bible who've done it. Do we know of other like minor characters or anything
Yeah.
like that? Or is it just two people ever thought to do it ever?
No, yeah. That's how hard it was. It was like Whole30. It's like just no one does it. I'm kidding. There were certainly other people who did it. I think the reason why, obviously Samson is, again, a special case. He's not only vowed into it for life, but he becomes a judge. Not Samson, that's Samuel. Samson is a judge. That's why his story is such a big deal. Samuel is the great prophet who anoints David. So his service is for life in that role. John the Baptist is the forerunner of Christ. So these characters are highlighted because they're incredibly important. I mean, yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Good.
For sure. Just trying to understand that context.
So beyond that, there's more. No razor shall touch his head. All the days that he separates himself to the Lord, he shall not go near a dead body, not even for his father or his mother, for brother or sister. If they die, shall he make himself unclean, because his separation to God is on his head. All the days of his separation, he is holy to the Lord. So no touchy dead things. And if any man dies very suddenly beside him, and he defiles his consecrated head, then he shall shave his head on that day of his cleansing. On the 7th day he shall shave it. And on the 8th day he shall bring 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons to the priest to the entrance of the tent of meeting. And the priest shall offer one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering, and make atonement for him, because he sinned by reason of the dead body. And he shall consecrate his head that same day, and separate himself to the Lord for the days of his separation, and bring a male lamb a year old for a guilt offering. But the previous period shall be void, because his separation was defiled. Now, I mean, this is like, you could almost imagine a cartoon strip being made of this. Like a man with like really long, shaggy hair, and he's like living his whole life as a Nazirite, and he's like sitting on a bench, and a guy just like croaks, and like kind of falls on his shoulder. Game over. Like, You have to start over now, dude. You were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there was specific instruction here. Just so we're clear here. Yeah. Yeah, please.
My last silly question about Samson.
Good. No, it's
Maybe second to last. Okay, so if it was so important for Samson to not be near dead bodies, like why was he especially good at authoring people's obituaries?
yeah.
Was a machine.
He was. He was. So, yeah, it's a great question. He's a judge, and the Spirit of the Lord rushes upon him, and he just goes like full Matrix, right? Kills like 6,000 people. But he's never near a dead body. Now, this is interesting, though. How does he pick up the jawbone? Y'all remember that? Where he takes the jawbone of the dead animal? Yeah, so I'm going to just leave you with that question because we're going to come to Samson. We'll talk about why. But we'll go into this a little bit more. Is that good? All right. Good. I'm not going to read the rest of it. I think we could belabor this a little bit more than what is probably necessary. The point is that, again, very specific instruction for a very holy vow. That's all I'll say about that. We'll say more about Nazaritic vows when we get to individuals that bear them. Any questions on it so far, though? All right. Good? Good. This is a quick one, but I love it. Numbers 12:3. Now, who wrote Numbers? I mean, yeah, we think Moses. Well, I think we're safe to say Moses probably wrote this. Start with me in chapter 12, verse 1. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. And they said, "Has Yahweh indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also?" And Yahweh heard it. Now the man Moses was very meek, more than all the people who were on the face of the earth. I just love to point that out. That's the word humble. And it just seems like the opposite of humble to write that about yourself. But Moses did it. It was inspired by God through his Spirit, so we'll accept it. That's all I'll say on that one. Numbers 13. This is where we get back into the weird stuff, right? So Numbers 13 is... they're standing there, they're looking into Canaan, the land of the Canaanites, a.k.a. the promised land, and they're not ready yet to go in, right? They're still thinking about this. And so they send some spies to go and spy out the land. And the spies go, and they find some things there. And we'll start in verse 30. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are able to overcome it." And then the men who had gone up with him said, "We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are." So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it of our great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them." Now, what's going on here? Who are the Nephilim? Yeah, the angel people creations. The half angel, half people creations. Remember in Genesis 6, where the sons of God went into the daughters of men, and their offspring were known as Nephilim, men of mighty, men of renown. So what is happening here? There's a few questions that have to be answered about this. One is, how did they survive the flood? You ever think about that? Genesis 6 comes before the flood, and God destroys all flesh in the flood. So how did that happen? I'm going to offer my thoughts on that. A couple of things. This is another one of those just puzzling questions. One, and again, take it or leave it. These are just my thoughts. One is that there's no indication that Genesis 6 is the only time where angels do what they say they do. So it is possible that after the flood, more angels did what they did in Genesis 6 and were thus also condemned. That is a possibility. We don't know that for sure. The Bible doesn't record that, but I mean, it doesn't record that it never happened again either. And so it just seems like if it happened once, it's reasonable to assume it could have happened again. Another perhaps sillier, but also I think more compelling reason might be how we understand flesh. And what I mean by that is flesh is something that is creative and natural. So we have flesh, animals have flesh. I don't mean in the spiritual sense. I don't mean in the sin sense. I mean in our just physical stuff, right? We have physical flesh. Animals have physical flesh. Fish have, well, they wouldn't have, they would have just swum around. Birds have physical flesh. Anything that died in this flood did just that, like it died. Anything with flesh died other than what was on the ark. But it's possible that these Nephilim were not understood as flesh. It's possible that because they are an unnatural part of creation, outside of God's boundaries for what we would consider flesh, that they could have lived and not died, and the Bible is still telling the truth. I don't have a problem with that understanding. I think that is actually pretty compelling, and here's why. And I will answer your question. God, when we understand that God is spirit, we understand spirit in a different way than an ancient Jewish person would have understood spirit. We understand it in a like ethereal, almost see-through, misty ghost kind of thing. Am I right about that? When you think of spirit, what do you think of? Yeah, wind, wispy, right? For a Old Testament, ancient Jewish person, spirit would have just been a different kind of substance. So this actually makes a lot of sense. Why, for example, in Genesis 18, it can say that 3 men walked up to Abraham, and then we find out those 3 men are actually not men. It's Yahweh and 2 angels. And yet they're walking, they're talking, they come in, Sarah makes bread, but then they're still able to do supernatural things. Because remember, it says she goes inside and hears them talking about the child they're going to have, and she laughs because she's of old age. And then she comes out with the bread, and God's like, "Why'd you laugh?" And she's like, "I didn't laugh." And he's like, "Yes, you did. I heard you laugh." Yeah. So how is it possible that God is spirit? We believe that the scriptures teach that. And yet he also shows up like this guy walking around. Angels are spiritual creatures, yet they can come down onto earth and procreate with women. How does this happen? I would submit to you it's because our view of spirit is not maybe the correct view of spirit. And again, this comes back to Genesis chapters 1 and 2. We talked about the first time we met about the image of God. That we are created in the image of God. And what I submitted to you is it's not that God looks like us, it's that we look like God. But we're different material. We're physical creations of God, but we bear his image. And so when we think about the spirit, the spiritual aspect of an individual, what we're not saying is not physical either. Just different innards. Spirit blood, not red blood. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how deep I would go into that. But my point is that if that's the case, then it makes sense that any offspring that would come from one of these would not be qualified in the natural realm either, and thus could have survived and just lived really long. It's a heavy question, isn't it?
No, heaven.
Oh, a heaven question. It's a heaven question for sure. Yes.
Why are we assuming that they are? It's just what the guy said.
Yeah, it's true.
Dude, there's giants.
Yeah.
The Nephilim
Yeah.
are there. We ain't going in. Like, why are we assuming that? Is there something that says it?
No? And that's a good question. Another great interpretive question. Her point is that they were huge guys, and the spies come back and say they're Nephilim, but how do we know they were really Nephilim? Yeah, and that's also a possibility. I like my spiritual different than flesh explanation a little bit more, but I mean, I'll give you that. It's a good one. No, it's a great question. These are the kind of questions we have to ask when we study Scripture. It's actually a really, really fantastic observation.
And then also they were mind readers.
Yes. Yes. Any other thoughts on that? All right. Numbers chapter 20. Miriam and Meribah. So the death of Miriam takes place. Verse 1, the people of Israel, the whole congregation came into the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed in Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there. Who is Miriam? Sister. How close was Moses and Miriam? Yeah, I mean, I think we can assume probably pretty dang close. They had gone, according to the Prince of Egypt, they had gone through a lot. They had gone through the whole Exodus together. They'd been through a lot of things. They'd seen a lot of things. And Miriam dies. I always want to make this point because I think it's one that is worth making, that in the Old Testament, specifically the Torah, you rarely get the record of a woman dying. It just is one of those kind of historical realities where God is working primarily through these guys. And so when the patriarchs die, it's a big deal. You get some verbiage about that. When sons of Israel die, you get some verbiage about that. You rarely get the women, their deaths recorded. You do get Sarah, Abraham's wife. In fact, you get a sizable portion on Sarah. You do get, let me think about that. Yeah, you get Rebecca. You get all of the patriarchs' wives, if I'm not mistaken, have some little blurb about their deaths. Sarah is by far the most comprehensive. But you get Miriam. And Miriam, I think that speaks to the incredible importance of her actions, her existence in this portion of biblical history. And so just kind of a cool point there. And I think what sets up, I don't want to psychologize this, but I think what sets up the rest of this chapter. Because after this, Moses goes back to the congregation of the people. There's no water for them. It says they assembled themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. And the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Would that we perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why have you brought the assembly of the Lord into this wilderness that we should die here, both we and our cattle? And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It is no place for grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, and there is no water to drink." And then Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. And the Lord spoke to Moses and said, "Take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and Aaron your brother, and tell the rock before the eyes to yield its water. So you shall bring water out of the rock for them and give drink to the congregation and their cattle." And Moses took the staff and before the Lord as he commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly before the rock, and he said to them, "Hear now, you rebels." I love that. "Shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" And Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not believe in me to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. These are the waters of Meribah, where the people of Israel quarreled with the Lord, and through them he showed himself holy." Okay, we'll end with this tonight, and then we'll get to the introduction to, well, I say that. We may be able to do the book of the Lord. We'll do Bronze Serpent next time, and then Deuteronomy. A few things about this passage. One, I'm compelled to think, at least a little bit, that Moses is in a place where he perhaps normally would not have struck the rock, but his sister just died. And I think that's an okay thing to read into this a little bit. There's a reason why Miriam's death is recorded directly before this. And so I have to think that there's some reason for that, the order of it. That he is compromised and not perhaps in his best state of control. And these people are they're saying things that are absolutely ridiculous. You came out of bondage and slavery, and yet here you are still murmuring. Like, it's just so, a lot of hard days and hard nights and sleepless nights, and his sister just died, and now they're complaining again, and I struck the rock once already and it worked. So I think there may have been a little bit of compromised emotion. But it seems like a harsh punishment, doesn't it? Seems like a pretty harsh punishment to just say, like, you struck the rock twice, you didn't command it like I told you, so now you're going to die before you go into the promised land. You're never going to see the promised land. Moses, the greatest prophet of all, doesn't get to go to Canaan because he hit the rock instead of spoke to it. Why? That seems strange. Until you read 2 Corinthians. And Paul draws out a distinction regarding this moment that is incredibly important for us. Very, very, very important. So if you go to 2 Corinthians, hold on, I'll tell you where, chapter 10, I think. Where is it at, Brittany? Help me out here. I didn't write this one down either. Somewhere, let's see here. In 2 Corinthians, what you end up finding is that the rock that produced the water was Christ, or somehow symbolizes Christ, is a picture of Christ, if you will. To the people of God, just a rock. But to... It's 1 Corinthians 10. I was thinking of 2 Corinthians. Okay, so I had the chapter right, but the book wrong. 1 Corinthians 10. He tells us that the rock is actually Christ. So in the very beginning, for I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud. That's Exodus terminology. And all passed through the sea. That's out of Egypt. And were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. And they all ate the same spiritual food. What was that? Manna, right. And they all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. Nevertheless, with most of them, God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. So they're all with Moses, and they're all doing all this stuff with Moses, and they're all drinking the water that comes out of the rock that Moses strikes. And the rock, Paul says, is actually Jesus. Now, we don't know how, or certainly Jesus is not like morphed into a rock at this point, right? I think there's some more symbolism going on than literal sentiment. But the point is that it symbolizes the Messiah. That understanding, I believe, unlocks why this is such a grave issue for God when Moses does what he does. If the rock is Christ and the rock is struck, and from that striking comes water that replenishes us and gives us life, then to strike the rock again is to crucify Christ again. We don't come to strike the rock a second time. We ask. We speak to the rock, and the rock provides. It's pretty interesting. Now, to be fair, Moses, he doesn't have this insider information. But here's what he did have, a clear commandment from God. And he violated that commandment. And I think the second part of why the punishment is such a harsh punishment is really more to do with who Moses is. Moses is the intermediary. He's the greatest prophet of all time. He's incidentally the first prophet. So the first major prophet. And so I think that his subsequent punishment and not his prevention from going into the promised land also sets up a really important precedent, which is if you're going to be a prophet, you better be obedient. If you're going to be a prophet, you better do what you're told, otherwise you get cut off. You speak one word falsely, you do one thing that I told you not to do as a prophet, you're done. And that is what Old Testament records for us. There are harsh punishments for prophets who are wrong or who are performing the right miracles but for the wrong reasons, leading people away from the Lord. Here's the last one I'm going to leave you with, because the bronze serpent will take too much time and I don't want to skimp on it because that's a really good one. Numbers 21, 14, and 15. This is just, again, a quick one that I wanted to include in here because I think it's just, if anything, very interesting. We get this little quote in 14 and 15. There it is said in the book of the wars of the Lord, Waheb and Suphah and the valleys of Arnon and the slope of the valleys that extends to the seat of Ar and leans to the border of Moab. Nothing significant to us, really. The question is, though, what is the book of the wars of Yahweh? And my answer is, we don't know. We don't know. But this illustrates something that I think is important, which is that the people of God had other books that they read from. They weren't necessarily scripture. They're not recorded in any of the Tanakh lists, the book of the war of Yahweh. But, I mean, it seems like a pretty epic book to get your hands on. The wars of Yahweh. We're going to come to a point in Jeremiah where we're going to talk about inspiration and the trustworthiness of Scripture. And we're going to get an even better picture of how we can view some of these other books. In particular, the Septuagint, which is the Greek Old Testament, but has some variations in some of its details. And so we're going to ask some weird questions, but we won't do that till we get to Jeremiah. Yes, question. What's the therefore? It's a good question. What is it there for? We'll come back next time and I'll answer that. Any other closing thoughts, questions? Okay, so next Wednesday, we will we'll wrap up Numbers. We will, I'm pretty confident, finish Deuteronomy. I don't have a ton of those. Next week's Deuteronomy talk is going to be probably heavier on structure than it is actual content, because Deuteronomy is really fascinating the way it's put together. And then we're out of the Torah, and we go into the writings. So, bless y'all. We'll see you then. Yep. Tree says, maybe the Nephilim were really tall, taller than the flood. I like that. That's a good one.